I would like to welcome everyone who is here, and I have the pleasure and the honor to open this first lecture of the Archaeology in Action lecture series on the Caucasus, organized by Sabine, Reinhold, and myself in the frame of the ARWA. ARWA is a non-profit international association for archaeological research in Western and Central Asia, founded in 2020 by Marc Lebeau, Barbara Helving, and Adnan Sharaf. And since then, it counts several hundreds of members, and which wants to establish a worldwide link between scholars working in Western and Central Asia, and which has also several aims, among which I just will cite some of them that I think are the most exciting and interesting one, among that, a growing interaction and communication between scholars and students, encouraging career developments of students, proposing archaeological fieldwork and training addressed to students, providing assistance to colleagues and students of countries in state of war, encouraging international cooperation and scientific projects, and encouraging the share of information between archaeological missions and host countries. In the frame of these actions, ARWA aims to promote the collaboration of scientists from all countries through initiatives that contribute to the progress of archaeological research, by also endorsing the principles of academic freedom and by rejecting any kind of discrimination. We have been invited, me and Sabine, by Marc Lebeau in February 2021, in full pandemic times, in order to organize a first round of lectures on the Caucasus, and we gladly accepted this invitation for several reasons. First of all, because after the first year of various lockdowns that sadly disconnected the archaeological community working in the Caucasus, this series of lectures represented the opportunity and still represents the opportunity to bring it back together, now the entire archaeological community, share new data, and carry on with exchanges and discussions on the archaeology of the Caucasus. Secondly, because the new practices of online lectures can open the opportunity to feed interaction between students and specialists, and simultaneously to reach a larger public and to raise a new awareness on the archaeology of the Caucasus. Finally, because we also wanted to move from the traditional boundaries of the academic research and highlight the role of the Caucasus, not only as a center of fully original developments in the past, and as well as probably in the present, but also as a fundamental hub of geographical, social, and cultural connectivity of the whole Eurasian macro region. And now I give the floor to Sabine Reinhold for a short introduction on the Caucasian region.
Yeah, thank you very much. I, like Giulio, gladly accepted the invitation to spearhead this first round of Caucasian lectures. I'm working on the North Caucasus, that is maybe a less known area. And I will just show you a handful of pictures to introduce you to this area. You see on one hand, the highest mountain in Europe, Mount Elbrus, with more than 5,600 meters, which is dominating the North Caucasus. And in the other picture, you see the Kura Valley, which moves down from the Caucasus in the direction of northern Mesopotamia. And this, in fact, is the link that unites the Near Eastern and the European perspective on archaeology, the one coming from the south, from northern Mesopotamia, Anatolia in Iran, the other coming from the north, from Europe, from Asia, and from the Eurasian steppes. You see here the Caucasus in the center is a high mountain covered with snow, at least in winter. We do at the moment have several states and several countries with partly joint, partly independent research histories representing the Caucasus. This is from north to south, Russia, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Iran, and Turkey, or from south to north, Iran, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Russia. There is no reason to order it in this or that way. Both of these, or all of these countries do have, on one hand, a local history of research, partly in the framework of the former Soviet Union, that is Russia, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. But they have also an international focus of research, and in our lectures, we try to bind all this together. That means that we integrated researchers from all of these countries, but also from other countries outside of the Caucasus that work in the Caucasus for this lecture to give a maximal overview on the ongoing archaeology of this area. And as we have been asked to translate or summarize the lectures in the local languages, which is, in my opinion, a very, very good idea. And first, I have heard on that first in the ARWA procedures. So this is a little bit on the languages that we can expect. And today we will have a summary in Azerbaijanic language. But the Caucasus is known as the mountain of languages. And in the course of these lectures, you will hear a lot of them. That's for all. And we have finally added another slide with the program. We will start today with Andrea Ricci's and co-authors talk on the archaeology of Azerbaijan. We then will have a lecture on Georgia by Georgi Bedinashvili and team, on a topic in Russia with Natalia Shishlina and her team. Unfortunately, Adam Smith, which we have invited to give another lecture in the beginning, could not do that. So we have shifted him in the final session. And you see that wants to introduce the 4 major countries in this area. And after that, we have several lectures, you can see them here on the slide, that address several topics which are discussed now. And with this and the link, I will then give over to Andrea Ricci, our first speaker, and his co-authors, which will then start to present. And I would like to mention it once more. The lectures are recorded and they will be available, purely the lectures without a discussion. They will be available on the ARWA homepage for further consultation. So Andrea, please.
Hello and good afternoon also from my side. I'm Andrea Ricci. And I start by sharing my screen. I hope it will work. Do you see it?
Yes.
And I will make it also a full presentation. Yeah, good afternoon. Well, first of all, thank you to the ARWA team, and specific also to Sabine, Reinhold, and Giulio for inviting me today here to present some thoughts, some reflection about the Neolithic occupation of the mid-plain. And it's a pleasure and it is an honor to be with this lecture to open the ARWA series on the Caucasus. Today, the paper regards the mid-plain of Azerbaijan. You'll see a picture that I'm very attached to. I took it some years ago on the early morning in the mid-plain while conducting some survey. Today's presentation is a joint venture, I would say, together with Teveküll Aliyev from the Azerbaijan Academy of Science in Baku. Azerbaijan is also present here, and as Sabine Reinhold mentioned just a minute ago, he will give also a summary of the results of the mid-plain project. Later on, also together with Barbara Helving now at the Städtische Museum in Berlin, in Germany. So, the topic, as I mentioned, as been mentioned, is the Neolithic occupation, and as a title which entails some reflection of this intensive but rather short occupation of the mid-plain in the 6th millennium. That's why I chose this title, Stop and Going, and I hope that through the presentation I will be able to indicate to you the reason of why we choose this title. In particular, just a slide also from my side, since this is the first lecture of the ARWA series on the Caucasus, also from my side some snapshots of the landscape that characterize this region, which is a bridge between northern Mesopotamia, the Zagros and the Taurus ranges, and the large Eurasian steppe. And this is a crucial element together with so the geographical location of the Caucasus. And here again, you see the very variegated landscape that we can find in a rather in a large, but also in a short distance from each other. We find the multifaceted. Here it's also a picture from me taken in an early flight morning out of Tbilisi, and it was just a gorgeous view on this flight going back to Germany. And also the Lesser Caucasus, not this highest peak, but also peaks that reaches almost 4,000 meters above sea level, as well as large alluvial plain of the Kura River, in this case, in this picture to the lower and lower right-hand inside, in the larger Kuro Arax river basin system. I mentioned before the region of the Caucasus is a bridge from the northern Mesopotamian perspective, is a bridge also towards the Eurasian steppes. And in this frame today, my paper tries to understand or try to give some hints on how the spread of Neolithic way of life took place in this region of the world. We see here a picture, or actually a map, a recent map, which was of 2019, in which we see how so some of the dating of this wave of Neolithization, of the spread of the Neolithic way of life towards Europe, towards Southeastern Europe, but also towards the Caucasus. And still remain a question, as you see also in this map. I don't know if you can see my mouse moving, but also the question is how from the Caucasus, or the Southern Caucasus, this Neolithic way of life spread into the large Eurasian steppic landscape. Neolithization was a multifaceted process of transition from hunting and gathering to sedentary life and to farming and herding. And this irreversibly changed human life. This process of neolithization took place in different areas, in a handful actually of regions across the world, where favorable climatic and biodiversity conditions enable the emergence of agriculture. One of them is the so-called fragile crescent from Levant, again, through, as you can see, all the way through along the Taurus mountainous ranges, all the way to the southern eastern part of Iran in the Zagros mountainous ranges. So, in this area of the world, the first plant and animal species were domesticated, or became domesticated in the first millennium of the Holocene. And as we see here, then they spread across Europe and then towards the north. And you see also the dating here. Today, we are addressing one little region of the Caucasus. So we'll go into details, but again, I just wanted to mention here that in the frame of this larger discussion about the spread of Neolithic way of life, we conducted intensive landscape survey investigation, as well as targeted and extensive excavation of some of the mid-6th millennium site in the mill plain of southern Azerbaijan. As you see to the left, I've also put a scan of a chronological table, which was published in 2007, so by Bertillone. And this is to mention that a big question mark remained for some of the area of the Southern Caucasus in terms of when the Neolithic way of life took place in some of the region of the Caucasus. In fact, the study of Neolithization was a late turn to the Caucasus. And that means that just over the last 15, 20 years, archaeological investigation diverted attention and concentrate on the research questions related to the Neolithic way of life in the Southern Caucasus. And as a result, we have a map which was recently published in an article led by Giulio Palumbi, map drawn by Emmanuel Baudouin, in which we see numerous sites which date to the Neolithic, or numerous Neolithic sites that concentrate mainly in 3 possibly, if we want to consider a larger view, 4 regions, and I will mention them very briefly. On the Southern Caucasus, we have the Ararat Plain, where we have sites like Aratashen or Mazis Blur, and I saw that among the participants of today's lecture, there is also Christina, who is the excavator of Mazis Blur. Then along the Araks, and we see again here in this map, the location of the Araks rivers going down towards Kultepe in the Next-Yerevan plain, where a site has also been recently newly investigated by a French team. And more sites are found along the so-called Kura River corridor, starting from Aruklo, the northwesternmost site located in southern eastern Georgia, all the way down to the site of Shumu Tepe, as well as Tepe, Kichik Tepe, and Mentesh Tepe. They form the so-called Shumu Sholaveri complex of Neolithic site, and farther along the Kura River, and actually towards the confluence of the Kura River with the Araks River, we find a few sites in the so-called Karabakh Plain, such as Ismail Bey Tepeze, and numerous sites of the Middle Plain. Today, we will concentrate on this area here, which, as you see, is a large alluvial plain at the confluence, close to the confluence between the Kura and the Araks River. Here, over the last 10 years, we concentrate with intensive excavation and survey. In particular, the results that I present today are part of a larger international and interdisciplinary investigation, which investigate some, or at least 3 of this microregion, again, Aruklo in southern eastern Georgia, Mentesh Tepe in the mid-course of the Kura River Valley, and Camille Tepe. With 3 microregions, we wanted to investigate the human environmental dynamics in the Southern Caucasus from the Neolithic to the Bronze Age. Most of the results, or numerous results, were then published in an edited volume, the Kura Project, Ancient Kura and Kura in Motion project that were led by Barbara Helbing, Bertil Lyonnais, and Sven Hansen to compile a team of French, German, Azeri, Jordan, and interdisciplinary international team members, indeed, to understand how the complex human environmental dynamics took place in the Southern Caucasus. So today, Camille Tepe, and actually the sites around Camille Tepe in the so-called Middle Plain of southern Azerbaijan. So a brief introduction about the geography of this area. And I put here together a slide of a digital terrain model to show you how the landscape of the Middle Plain is a rather flat, long stretch at the Piedmont, a stretch of land at the Piedmont of the Lesser Caucasus that you see here in the background. And also in this profile, you see how flat the area here. You see the position of Camille Tepe, as well as in these pictures, might be possible to see some of the tributaries river that tributary river of the Kura that comes down from the Lesser Caucasus. And in this plain, which is flat and open, and it's incised by these mini tributaries of the Kura River, we have an annual rainfall of nowadays approximately 350-400 millimeters of rainfall per year. However, we have strong seasonal and also yearly fluctuation in this rainfall average. This means that we have, with this interannual deviation and with this strong seasonal fluctuation of rainfall, as well as with the geology and geomorphology of the area, farming in this area is a risky undertaking, even nowadays. And we see it because already you can kind of imagine the landscape that we have here with, in one area, some fields, but closer to the mountains, we have less agriculture taking place. And specifically, we don't have any intensive agriculture. In fact, most of the land is still used for large flocks of sheep and goats. We have farming taking place only where we have major irrigation activities or major irrigation management, which start in the 1950s with the Soviet time, during the Soviet times, and we see still these large Soviet time canals which divert the water. and where the water is available, then it's possible to do some stable farming and some stable agriculture. Otherwise, it's a risky undertaking. The area has been not the focus of major archaeological investigation, and we have only a handful of investigation that took place in the 1950s and the 1960s, like the excavation, the Azerbaijani archaeological expedition to the mill step by Yessen and then Narimanov. And we had only a few sites. You see here the map published in the 50s by published in 1965 of the expedition of Yessen in the region, and we had only 9-10 sites which were known. We knew that there was this characteristic painted ware that we will see also later in other pictures of our investigation, which characterized the area. In terms of again, the area that I was mentioning before, I mentioned also the major irrigation canal, and you see to the right we have this landscape of this modern landscape of destruction, and to the left the landscape of survival. By these two terms, I mean that to the right, when water is diverted and we have large irrigation system, then it's possible to conduct intensive agriculture. But to the left, where still nowadays we have large, we have large flat landscapes, and where, yes, and then Narimanov and also Teveküll Aliyev conducted some targeted investigation, we have a landscape which has preserved large and smaller archaeological features, including sites, including a lot of Neolithic sites. This is it was one of the first, I call it, discovery of 2010, when I started the survey around Camille Tepe in summer of 2010. And as I arrived there, I was amazed by the level of the quality of the landscape preservation of archaeological features in the area. So starting from 2010, we conducted intensive pedestrian as well as equestrian survey in this large landscape, flat landscape of survival. And we also conducted targeted investigation of possible anomalies. We integrated both pedestrian as well as equestrian in survey in order to enable flexible system of also speeding up how we recorded the landscape. The infrastructure, including roads, is very limited in the area, so to walk and cover large area of the landscape will require a lot of time. So in order to speed up the process of recording and documenting this landscape, it was also very useful to use some horses, even though one has to admit sometimes the horses didn't want to walk along and we had to convince them. So most of the time was efficient, not all the time, but it was also great fun, I have to admit. And horses are still one of the most common means of transportation of the area. Indeed, as I said, roads are very limited. There are some dirty track crossing the plain, but if you want to walk around with your flocks of goat and sheep, horses are still the best means of transportation. So they are also available for archaeologists. Thanks to this pedestrian equestrian survey, combined also with the analysis of remote sensing data, which, however, I have to admit are of limited use in this flat landscape of survival, even though, as we see in this picture of a satellite imaging in the 1970s of a corona spy imagery, we see that a number of features are visible in the landscape, in this case, in relation to the Sasanian early Islamic and medieval site of Oren Kale, Belay Khan, that you see here, this large enclosed double enclosure sites, and we saw a number of possible hallways as well as canal or possible fort in the landscape, thanks to this analysis of remote sensing data, which we integrate together with we integrated with pedestrian and equestrian survey. Thanks to this intensive survey investigation, we were able to cover more than 4,000 hectares of land of the mill plain, and in total we were able to document 174 sites, of which only 9 were previously known. By sites, we mean, in this case, on this slide side of all periods, from the Neolithic all the way to the Middle Ages. And even though I have to underscore that we have periods of intensive occupation of the plain and also periods of long, meaning for several centuries, abandonment of the plain. So we have peaks and flows of the occupation of the plain. Today, we will concentrate, as we said, on the Neolithic. And so I will not spend more words on the general results of the survey. However, I would like to say that the intensive pedestrian and equestrian survey enabled us also to discover, to make some, I will call them now, amazing discoveries, which were very joyful for us, including, for example, the discovery of a large obsidian core, almost 13 kilos. Here we see our lithic specialist on site MPS 93 on the survey. That was indeed the moment of the discovery, and it is quite amazing to think that the next obsidian source is more than 150 kilometers away to the west, away from the mill plain site, to the west of it in the Lesser Caucasian mountains, close to Yerevan Lake. So to transport this large obsidian core must have been quite an achievement, quite an intensive work. Unfortunately, we cannot date this obsidian core because it was found on the surface of MPS 93. One of these 174 sites, and on this side we found pottery dated to the Neolithic, Chalcolithic, as well to the Iron Age period. So it's difficult, it's impossible to date the moment in which this obsidian core was moved from the Lesser Caucasian mountain all the way down to this area. Another discovery that was also kind of a surprise is a treasure of 885 coins for a total of 2.7 kilos, and discovered the site of MPS 90, and they date to the 13th century AD. They were found all together, meaning in 2 square meters on the surface of this site. And of course, this was a treasure, a discovery, and also was a kind of a surprise at home where the team saw the result of the daily collection of these coins. Maybe I should mention also that, as you see, I'm saying MPS, site MPS 90, site MPS 93, as we don't have that many, we don't have intensive occupation of the plain, we don't have topographic names of the sites. That means that MPS is the acronym for the Mill Plain Survey, and we had to add a number, and most of the sites, except a few exceptions, indeed, have a name. So I have to apologize if I will give some numbers and not names, but this is because of this landscape of survival where only flocks of sheep and goats walk. And so now coming to the Neolithic sites, and in particular this dense Neolithic occupation, we saw that we have 174 sites dated to the different periods from the 7th millennium all the way to the late medieval time. But in particular, we got 65 sites that we can date thanks to the surface collection, pottery and lithic. We can date them to the mid-6th millennium. You see them here indicated by these orange dots, and you see also again the tributaries of the Kura River going from the southwest to the northeast. A number of them are located on the lower or higher terraces of, for example, the Karasu or the Spartacai. But also we find some of the sites which are not related to us, immediately related to the water basin system, the tributary water basin of the system of the Kura River. As you see, the distance can also vary between a few hundred meters, as for example in this cluster of sites 42, 43, 45, or they can also be 2.5, 3 kilometers apart from each other. So we have a very variegated landscape, but it seems fairly densely occupied landscape with 65 sites dated to the mid-6th millennium BC. Here I put together just a few or three pictures of these sites because one important feature of this Neolithic site is that they are generally very small. By being small, I mean not even half an hectare. You see here, for example, MPS 42 to the lower left corner. You see here is my backpack and a couple of plastic bags with the pottery collected on the surface. So you have a sense of how small the sites are. So they are less than an hectare in size. You can also see it here on MPS 3, where some of the team members, including, are on top of these low elevated, shallow mounds. And this is the other characteristic. They are small, as we see in the picture, 1 meter, half a meter high. Sorry, they are small, less than a half an hectare, and they are also very shallow, very low. This graph to the right indicates the number of sites that are less than half an hectare in size. And you see also the majority is half an hectare, 1 hectare maximum, and only a few are larger than this size. And this indicates, and we'll see this through the presentation, indicates, in my opinion, that these sites were represent very short time occupations. Shallow stratigraphy, small inside, they represent a small community using this landscape for a short period of time. These include, for example, a lot of movement or re-establishing or relocation of sites for a short period of time, or moving these sites. Moving the site meaning that leaving this landscape, experimented the Neolithic way of life with stable farming and stable occupation implies also a high degree of experimentation, in which by exploring this landscape and how risky can be the agricultural practices in practicing agriculture in this landscape meant possibly also to be closer to the river in most of the cases, but also the necessity to move. Small farm, probably 1 or 2 families lived in these small sites. So they enable us to have a glimpse into this first and early phase of Neolithization and stable occupation of the mill plain. And again, this is a result that is possible thanks to this highly degree of landscape of preservation. By meaning, because there has not been major mechanized agriculture activity taking place in the last 60, 50 years, even shallow tepes, even shallow mounds, which otherwise would be washed away by intensive agriculture, are visible. And therefore, we have a unique opportunity to look into the early phase of Neolithization of the Southern Caucasus. The results of the survey are also to be understood or to be interpreted together with the results of excavation, sounding, and test trench were achieved at 10 Neolithic sites. And this indicated, again, one of the features of this 6th millennium site of the mill plain, which is the highly variegated nature of the sites of this occupation. And now I will show you some slides in the next few minutes regarding the excavation, so that you can have a look at what I meant indeed here with this variegated nature of the sites. Starting from Camille Tepe, we have already mentioned this earlier, which was one of the 9 sites known in the region, and is located in the frame of the landscape investigation, is located at the core of the survey, because indeed we started everything from there when in 2009, Teveküll, Aliyev, and Barbara Helving went to visit in spring the site. They discovered that the site had been massively damaged by the large bulldozer trench that you see here in this in this picture of April 2009, as well as you can see it from a distance, is this large trench. And that was the first reason also, one of the first reasons why excavation started at Camille Tepe, because of this large bulldozer trench and the endanger, how this endangered the site. And one of the first action on the following excavation in summer was to clean one of these sections, and slowly more and more mud bricks were exposed and documented. And then over the years, excavation took place, not just to clean up the profile, but also to find the margins of this large mud brick installation that turned out to be a massively constructed platform of hundreds and thousands of mud bricks that you see here in this overview of, I think it was 2010 or 11, this picture, after 2 seasons of excavation. This massively constructed mud brick platform you see here in this overview in this plan to the right, and you see that it's a very large reconstructed diameter of more than 22 meters. And you see it also here on the margins of this aerial picture. And around this platform, we then discovered, thanks to the expanded excavation, a number of other installations and other number of built structures, which included several smaller and larger rooms, including this petal-shaped structure which is directly attached to the platform. I think there is a picture that illustrates this, including a semi-subterranean subcircular where's my mouse on here? Installation, actually constructed mud brick structure to the north of the platform, not directly attached to it and not in direct connection to it, but indicated there was different phases of building this structure outside of the platform, which is here visible as the first phase of excavation and use and occupation of the site of the mill plain in Camille Tepe. One of the discovery of the excavation to the north of the platform was a number of ashy layers that you see in this profile to the north of the platform. Indicated in this profile, I try to put the arrow in one of the areas where also micromorphological analysis conducted by Lisa Shilido indicated that there were inside this abundant ashy material, lightweight construction debris, including dug and branches, as well as residual architectural material. And this is very important because the result of this micromorphological investigation of or analysis of these ashy layers, because in fact the upper layers of the platform are no longer preserved. They have been eroded away, they have been washed away by 7,000 years of rain and eroded events, as well as by modern taphonomic process, including this larger bulldozer trench. So we had no indication of what could have stayed on top of the platform. But thanks to this analysis, we can think that something was on top. We don't know exactly what. This is a speculative reconstruction. We know that there was some architecture on top of the platform. As I said, the upper layer are unfortunately gone. And we know that in the contemporary site of northern Mesopotamia, we have illustration of construction built on top of possible mud bricks, as we see here in this house image from the Mustafa in Turkey, dated to the Aliyev period. On this large pottery sherd, we see here, for example, a possible platform, and again here some construction on top of it, as well as an house from another outside, again into in Turkey, Kara-Velian. And so this indicates or give us some hints about the possibility of some construction on top of this large, massively constructed platform. Again, in this ashy layer, other indication of what could have happened on top of the platform are these painted Neolithic ware found at Camille Tepe and found specifically in this ashy layer, which indicate multiple events in which whatever happened on top of the platform was cleaned off, meaning that there were these ashy layers that were pushed away from the platform together with numerous architectural material, as we saw before, as well as a really abundant material in terms of pottery. And we see here also the presence of a number of, or at least we see here the presence of larger bowls as well as cooking ware. And together with wild fauna, meaning that we have a lot of bone materials in this ashy layer to the north and northwest of the platform, which were founded, including the so-called little bustard tetrax, and as well as sturgeon fishes. And this material was studied by Norbert Benek in the frame of the archaeozoological studies conducted on the Mill Plain sites. And so if we put together these elements, we have ashy layers, which indicated that major and several burning events took place. We have this larger board and cooking ware, which was used on the platform, as well as this wild fauna. One of the hypotheses, which I think in my opinion is a reasonable hypothesis, is that at Camille Tepe, we found some feasting activities or feasting activity were taking place on top of the platform, in which large barbecues, large events, large festivities, feasting took place. So ash layer, pottery, and wild fauna indicate this. And they had tasty meals. And in this landscape that we saw before, and you see also in the background of my screen right now is fairly flat, or actually it's very flat. Every little elevation, topographic elevation, is highly visible. And if you on top put some roasting event, including fire activities and some lighting thanks to fire, then every a place like Camille Tepe, that you see here again in this picture, becomes extremely visible. It becomes a landmark. So in the frame of a landscape where we have very shallow, as we saw before, very shallow tepe, 1 meter, half a meter, then they are highly, I would say them now, invisible. Every topographic elevation, and on top of it, some activities that are taking place as a feasting, as a communal activity, take a role as a landscape or a landmark in this very flat landscape. So Camille Tepe becomes one of the anchoring, if not the anchoring place of the Mill Plain occupation. And I have to also to underline how this massively constructed mud platform is unique in the landscape of the Mill Plain. We don't have other sites, larger or smaller, where a massively constructed monumental structure is present. And so Camille Tepe has a specific role, not just in the history of the Mill Plain project, but also most likely in the Neolithic way of life of the Mill Plain communities. As we know, as I mentioned, unfortunately, the upper part of the platform is no longer preserved, so we are interpreting the data, and some of the questions remain unsolved, and some of the functional role of Camille Tepe remain enigmatic. Enigmatic remains also the function of another site, which is located only approximately 850 meters to the southeast, the southwest of Camille Tepe. It is a site MPS4, discovered in 2004. You see it here in this picture. It's a very flat site. From the surface, there is no topography visible. There were an handful of sherds visible on the surface, which were emerged because of tunneling of animals recently. And then Jörg Fassbinder and his team conducted some magnetic geophysical investigation of the site, and it was possible for Jörg Fassbinder to identify concentric features that you see here in this map of the magnetic result, and here are schematically represented in this overview plan. And of course, this was another enigmatic feature from the results of the magnetic analysis, and therefore the investigation of this site absorbed a lot of season, but it was possible indeed to identify 3 concentric ditches, possibly even a 4th one. And among these that you see also here, 2 of them are listed. One is here, the inner one, and this is the second one from the inner side. And in these ditches, we found also 4 fragments of this clay figurine, which was found not in the same unit, not in the same stratigraphic unit, but it was found in 4 different, actually 3 different positions. You see in the arrow, I tried to indicate approximately the location of each of these this fragment of the figurine, indicating that during the filling or process of these concentric ditches, material from different the material was rapidly accumulating in the filling of these ditches, because coming from different locations of these ditches, this is what we interpret. Another feature of these ditches, and in particular here we see some of these transversal wall made of mud bricks, which are located not at a regular distance, but are located, you see it here in the first and in the second digit. And you see here again in the profile, one of this wall, and again from above this wall. It's still for us puzzling to understand what exactly happened and what for were these ditches meant to be used or constructed for. And again, one of the questions that made everything, or one of the outcomes of the excavation that made everything even more puzzling, was the discovery of a staircase tunnel going deep inside the inner part of the inner ditch. And this is indeed from the bottom of the ditch. You see here these numerous steps going down more than 2.5 meters. We were not able to finish the excavation of this tunnel or underground dark structure, because it was becoming very dangerous and with high risk of collapse of this tunnel feature. And these remain somehow enigmatic features, also because in this case we have no indication, because of, again, of erosion, of what could have stand, for example, in the central part, in the core area of this ditch, concentric ditch system. We have the idea that there could have been some floor level, but nothing else is preserved in situ. So at this stage, it's not possible to give any clear explanation of the function of these concentric ditches, as well as this underground tunnel. At this side, we find another type of pottery, which is different from the classic mill plane painted pottery, which is this monochrome pottery. And you see here some of the examples, and I just wanted to put this picture to indicate that we have this known painted pottery we saw also earlier already in the publication of the Soviet time, but also in the excavation of Camille Tepe. And then we have this monochrome pottery, which is found at site like MPS 4, and is probably dated to an earlier phase of the occupation of the mill plane, earlier phase, still in the middle of the 6th millennium. Soon we will see some of the C14 dates, so that we can also have a sense of the chronology. I mentioned earlier that we have numerous sites, and we have a very highly variegated nature of these sites. And here a couple of snapshots on 2 other sites. One is MPS 5, again, very close to Camille Tepe, 800 meters to the northeast of it, where we have domestic structure and no monumentality. They are a small building, again, built with these mud bricks, unburned mud bricks, and they give a sense of domestic use of these structures. In Anhalt, you see again here one shallow tepe, not even 1 meter, and highly difficult to see it in the landscape. Another of this site is a small site with domestic structure is 103, a little bit farther away from Camille Tepe, and actually not along any of the tributary of the Kura River. You see this in this flat landscape. We saw already this picture with some of the team members on top of the site. Another fairly tiny sweet site with a shallow occupation and shallow stratigraphy here. Maria Bianca Danna conducted some excavation for not even 2 weeks in 2014, I think it was, and here she was able to identify 6 rooms which have a domestic character, and they are fairly small. You see also the scale is 50 centimeter. In room number 3, Bianca and Anna identified 2, possibly 3 larger pitoids, and with the typical handmade pottery of the mill plain. And in this area, and specifically in room 2, there was also one example of an infant burial underneath a floor level or a surface. And this is one of the very, very few Neolithic burials that we have in the mill plain, and that we can date with confidence to the Neolithic occupation of the site. And we spoke about wild fauna, and we spoke earlier also in the introduction about how the spread of Neolithic indicated into their areas included also the new ways of life, which include domesticated plants and animals, and the results of both the archaeological investigation conducted by Norbert Benecke, as well as the archaeobotanical studies by Alexia Bouquet, indicates that the majority, the greatest majority, 98%, are domesticated animal species, 88% are domesticated cereals, which indicated a full developed Neolithic economy in this earliest phase of occupation of the mill plain. How do we date these sites? We have a number, I think more than 20 C14 dates that enable us to date these sites to a very specific lack of time, which is the mid of the 6th millennium. And all these 65 sites have comparable pottery, and this in C14 dates indicate that the sites were datable and were occupied between approximately 5,650 and 5,350. That means something like 3 centuries. It's a very short period, but with a very intense occupation of this plain, even though we have to consider that most likely these 65 sites were not contemporaneously occupied. But it's also, we don't have any indication for an earlier occupation or settlement in the plain, as well as we don't have after 5,350, 5,325 any sign, meaning we don't find in the survey any indication of a period of occupation for more than 500-600 years. Compared to other sites in the Southern Caucasus, and we saw already the map here, but here I put together very quickly an indication of how do we date this, when do we date this mill plain site. They come rather late in the framework of the Neolithization of the Southern Caucasus. We know, again, site like Kichik Oyuk, also confirmed by Giulio Palumbi's excavation, but also Mazis Blur, or other side along farther along the Kura River corridor are dated earlier, in the earlier phases of the 6th millennium, whereas the mill plain sites are concentrating this rather short period, 300 years of occupation in the mid part of the 6th millennium. And then they stopped and we have an abandonment of the plain. Yeah, I would like now to go into summing up some of the aspects that I presented to you today. And I already mentioned several times, I think that the sites on the mid plain were rather, the Neolithic sites of the mid plain are rather small and shallow tepe. They are short time occupation. And together they form a highly variegated landscape, meaning that we have sites such as Camille Tepe, where probably people gather, they conducted feasting activity, they were together to share a common identity, also to perform some kind of activities together. And we also saw enigmatic features such as the NPS4 concentric dishes, but also we saw domestic features such as the one NPS5 and NPS 103. If we put this in a nutshell, every time that we open new trenches in a new site, we were always finding new unexpected things. So the nature is highly variegated of the site, and the sites are small and shallow. How do they differ from other sites that we know from the Southern Caucasus? Well, they are quite peculiar, I would say, because other sites along the Kura River, such as the complex of sites of the Shomo-Shulaveri Tepe, present different architecture. Fairly, I will use a word that is a bit stretching the evidence, but somehow standardized in comparison to the mill plain sites, meaning with circular architecture, circular built architecture, and most characteristic is also the fact that this architecture built longer stratigraphy. We saw how shallow the sites of the mill plain are, and sites such as Tepe raises more than 50 meters above the surroundings, and ARWA more something like 10 meters. We don't have this kind of sites in the mill plain. And this indicates this short time of occupation. I mentioned again the monumentality and also the enigmatic feature of Camille Tepe. And again, one thing that is important in the frame of interpreting and understanding how the spread of the way of life, the Neolithic way of life took place in the Southern Caucasus, that the subsistence of the people who live in the mill plain in the mid-6th millennium was based on a fully developed Neolithic farming and animal husbandry. Yeah. So this is, I think it's the last slide, and I would like to come back to the title. I put stopping and going. So, and my idea was to interpret this as at two levels. We have small sites with very short life cycles, which imply also that possibly there was a relocation of sites across the plain. These 65 sites were not contemporaneously occupied. So there was a kind of we stop and then we go and we move somewhere else in the frame of this mill plain. And also we have these 3 centuries at the mid of the 6th millennium. There was short-living, intense but short-living occupation. They arrived there with fully domesticated Neolithic package, the domesticated fauna and flora, so the full Neolithic package. And they stayed there for 300 years, or this community lived there. And after 5,350, we see that there is a long phase of abandonment. So there was we stop here and then we move away. We do not know yet the reason why there was this stop and going mechanism of living in the landscape of the mill plain, and also we don't know where the earlier and later settlements are, and which are the reasons behind this stop and going nature of the sites. And this is for sure one of the largest or the most compelling and challenging questions for the next phase of research in the area, possibly also link both to socio-cultural dynamics, as well as, in my opinion, to possibly geomorphological or environmental factor that must play a role in shaping this landscape from a cultural perspective. I think was the last slide. I would like to thank everybody for, once again, for organizing this lecture series, and you for your attention. Here is again one of the picture of the mill plain looking towards the Lesser Caucasus. I think now Teveküll Melli will give a summary of this presentation in Azeri. So I will give the stage to him and the microphone, this virtual microphone as well. Thank you.
Sağ ol Andrea. Çok güzel, geniş, etraflı məruzə etdin. Mən sənə təşəkkür edirəm. Mən Mil Ovasında, Mil düzündə anadan oldum, Kəbirli kəndində. Andrea bütün Mil düzünün, ovalığının xarakteristikasını verdi. Bütün Neolitik dönemde karakteristikasını verdi. Ne için Camille Tepe? Niye Camille Tepe? Hemin anda, hemin dövrdə Camille Tepe'de antropogen təsir nəticəsində dağılmışdı. Buldozer danışdın. Və ona göre Azerbaycan, Alman birgə ekspedisiyası 2009-cu ildə burada işlere başladı. Sonra bu iş genişlendi, emektaşlık arttı. Almanya Arkeoloji Enstitüsü, Azerbaycan Elmler Akademiyası, Gürcistan Milli Muzeyi ve Fransa Araştırmalar Merkezi birgə proje, layihə yaptılar. 2010-12-ci illərdə Qədim Kür, 2013-14-cü illərdə Kür hərəkətdədir. Və bu proje daxilində tədqiqatlar zamanı təkcə Azərbaycan yox, bütöv Qafqazın mədəniyyətinin, Neolitik dövrü mədəniyyətinin araşdırılmasında yeni bir addım oldu. Mil ovalığı antik dönemdə, Roma dönemində Kaspiyana, orta çağlarda isə Balasakan düzü adlanırdı. Sonraki mərhələlərdə müxtəlif adları olub bu ovalığın. Qarqar ovalığı, Honaşen ovalığı, Peyğəmbər ovalığı və s. adlar. Daha çox Mil ovalığı. Qarabağ böyük bir region əhatə edir və iki hissədən ibarətdir. Aşağı Qarabağ, yuxarı Qarabağ. Aşağı Qarabağın bir hissəsi məhz bu Mil ovalığıdır. Mildə arxeoloji tədqiqatlar 19-cu yüzildə aparıldı. Burada Vestsenkov, Emil Ressler, Ivanovski ve başkaları işledi. Ama 20. yüzyılın ortalarında Yessen, tanınmış halin, Mil düzünde tamamıyla yeni grup abideler aşkar etti ki, bu abidelerden biri de Camille Tepe idi. 2009-cu ildə Camille Tepe'de qazı başlananda elə ilk andan kərpiç platformanın bir hissəsi aşkar oldu. Ve bu kərpiç platforma üzerinde York Fassbinder geofiziki tədqiqatlar apardı ve məlum oldu ki bu platformanın bütün içerisi hamısı çiğ kərpiçdən inşa olunmuştur. Andrea təsvir etdi. Bu dairəvi formada olub, 24 metr diametri olubdur bunun. Hündürlüyü 2,6 metr ve 13 kat kərpiçdən ibarət olmuşdur. Bu tamamıyla yeni bir platforma idi. Ne Qafqazda, ne Şərqi Avropada belə bir platforma, kərpiç platforma aşkar olmamıştı. Neolitik döneminde belə bir platformanın inşa olunması çok büyük hadisə, yeniliğiydi. Mil düzündə, ovalığında bu platforma sanki hər yandan görükə bilərdi, görünürdü. Eyni zamanda platformanın inşasında çoxlu əmək, işçi, fəhlə çalışmışdı. Çox böyük işlər. Eyni zamanda bu platforma birdən-birə yaranmayıb. Burada əvvəldən planlaşdırılıb, müəyyən planlaşma, qabaqcadan, öncədən planlaşma işləri getmişdir. Hələlik bu platformanın funksiyası haqqında müxtəlif fikirlər var. Amma Andrea da təsvir etdiyi platformanın üzərində tikililərin olması ehtimal olunur. Çünki platformanın ətrafında otaqlar, dördkünc otaqlar aşkar olunub. Orada olan qalıqlar, odun, qamış, gil atılmışdı, yuxarıdan aşağıya atılmışdı. Və hələlik bu problem açıq qalır və bunu gələcəkdə yenə də izah etməyə ehtiyac olacaqdır. Camille Tepe'nin Neolit dövrü materiallarının Andrea qeyd etdiyi kimi əksəriyyəti çoxu boyalı, boyasız, saxsı qablardan ibarətdir. Və bunlar eyni üsulla hazırlanıb, əldə hazırlanıb və tərkibində bitki qarışıqları olan nümunələr var. Artıq biz vizual şəkillərdən də gördük ki, o boyalı keramikanın üzərində üçbucaq, romb şəkilli, şimşək və s. təsvirlər əks olunmuşdur. Camille Tepe'nin daş məmulatı demək olar ki, çox azdır. Çünki burada düzəndir və burada torpaqdır, daş yoxdur. Bunlar bura başqa yerlərdən gətirilib. Ermənistan yaylasından gələ bilər, Qarabağın dağlıq hissəsindən. Çünki burada bazalt daşından nümunələr var, firuzə nümunəsi muncuq aşkar olunubdur və s. Eyni zamanda sümük materialda kemik çox azdır Camille Tepe'də. Və bu kemiğin azlığı Camille Tepe'ni Şomitepe, Şulaveri mədəniyyətindən, kulturasından fərqləndirir. Orada daha çoxdur, burada isə azdır. Çox az vardı, qalmışdır. Qazıntılar zamanı Camille Tepe'dən bəzək əşyaları tapılıb, xüsusilə MPS 4-dən muncuq ateliyesinin tapılması çox böyük bir iş idi. O muncuq ateliyesində minlərlə balıq qulağından olan muncuqlar düzəldilib və eyni zamanda əmək alətləri, deməli, obsidian və başqa daşlardan əmək alətləri tapılıb. Çox yaxşı ki, Almaniya Arxeologiya İnstitutunun əməkdaşı, gənc cavan əməkdaşı İlyevvan bu materialları işləyib, artıq nəşr edib, çap edibdir bu işləri. Andrea Ricci həmin illərdə Camille Tepe'də qazılarla yanaşı bütün Mil Ovası və ətraf ərazilərdə survey yapmış və 170'e yaxın abidə qeydə almışdır. 170. Nəzərə çatdırım ki, Sovet dönəmində həmin regionda cəmi 10 abidə var idi, qeydə alınmışdı. Amma son illərdə isə burada 170'e yaxın abidə qeydə alındı və onların 65'i Neolitik dönəmə aiddir. Və bu Neolitik dönəmə aid olan abidələrdən bir neçəsində, təkcə Camille Tepe yox, MPS 4'də, MPS 5'də, eləcə də MPS 18'də Qarabel Tepe'də nisbətən geniş qazıntılar aparıldı. Burada Mildüzü abidələrinin dövrünü müəyyən etmək üçün həm müqayisəli təhlil analiz, həm də radiokarbon analizlər aparılıb. Və bu analizlər göstərir ki, bu abidələr tam eyni dönəmdə uzun müddət mil düzündə olmayıb. Yəni, onlar biri digərini əvəz edib. Camille Tepe, MPS 4 və MPS 5. Onlar müxtəlif xüsusiyyətinə görə fərqlənir. Məsələn, dövr etibarı ilə MPS 4'də yarımqazma evlər var, xəndəklər var, monoxrom keramika var. MPS 5'də otaqlara bənzər kiçik tikillər var. Monokrom qırmızı qablar var. Camille Tepe'də isə boyalı qablar üstünlük təşkil edir, çoxdur. Eyni zamanda o platform aşkar olunmuşdur. MPS 4'də saytda Andrea təsvir etdiyi o xəndəklər sistemi çox böyük maraq oyatmışdır. 2.7 metr, 2.7 metr hündürlüyündə və V şəkilli xəndəklərdir. Bu xəndəklərin də funksiyası hələlik aydın deyil, analogiyası da hələ yoxdur. Orada bir quyu da açılıb, Andrea onu vizual göstərdi, su quyusunun açılması. Bu da maraqlıdır. Çünki hal-hazırda Mil ovalığında su böyük problem. Hətta biz bu yaxınlarda bu Camille Tepe qazılarının bugünlə necə müqayisə etmək olar? O zaman 8000 il bundan öncə insanlar suyu necə əldə edirdilər, necə toplayırdılar, quyular necə qazılırdı? Camille Tepe bizə bu sahədə yeni materiallar vermişdir. Bütövlükdə Mil ovalığında təsərrüfat, əkinçilik və maldarlıq təsərrüfatına ayrılır. Maldarlıqdan danışanda Mil ovalığının sakinləri əsasən xırda buynuzlu heyvanlar, quzudur, keçidir və s. saxlayıblar. Amma iri buynuzlu heyvanlardan inək də var. Donuz kemiklərinə də rast gəlinir. Maraqlıdır ki, bu heyvan sümüklərinin arasında quş və balıq sümükləri də Andrea qeyd etdiyi sümükləri var. Çox maraqlıdır ki, doktor Norbert Beneki'nin fikrincə nərə cinsindən olan deməli ağ balığın huso deyirlər, o balığın burada Camille Tepe'də kəmiyinin tapılması sübut edir, göstərir ki, Camille Tepe, Mil ovalığı Neolitik dönemində dənizə çox yaxın olmuşdur. Dəniz bura yaxın olmuşdur. Əkinçilikdən danışanda Mil ovalığında əsasən arpa bitkisindən istifadə olunub və bunu arxeoloji qazıntılardan əldə olunan nəticələr aydın göstərir. Bütövlükdə 2009-15-ci illərdə 6-7 sənə burada tədqiqatlar getdi və nəticədə dedik, təkcə Azərbaycan üçün deyil, bütövlükdə Qafqaz və dünya elmi üçün əhəmiyyətli nəticələr əldə olundu. Bu dövrdə Mil düzünün Neolit dövrü abidələrinin dövrləşməsi, Andrea da qeyd etdi, horizontal görürük ki, onlar müəyyən ərazilərdə yayılıblar, yerləşiblər və əlverişli onlar bir yerdə 100-150 il yaşayıb, sonradan yeni yerə köçür, daha əlverişli təpələrdə məskən salırdılar. Və beləliklə deyə bilərik ki, çünki bu çox böyük mövzudur, hazırda biz danışdıq, tema çox geniş mövzudur. Andrea'nın çıxışından da gördük ki, burada çoxlu aspektlər var. Amma biz bunu rezüme eləsək görərik ki, bütövlükdə Mil düzündə aparılan deməli bu tədqiqatlar qədim əhalinin məsafə cəhətdən çox uzaq olmasına baxmayaraq, Mil ovalığında olan sakinlər Zagros dağlarında, İranın şimal-qərbində, Xəzər dənizinin cənubunda olan mədəniyyətlərlə, kulturaları ilə daha sıx əlaqələr saxlamışdılar. Və nəhayət deyə bilərik ki, bu tədqiqatlar bəhs olunan dövrdə Mil ovalığında baş verən sosial-iqtisadi proseslərin rekonstruksiyasına, eləcə də burada təşəkkül tapan ibtidai cəmiyyətlərin mədəni təsərrüfat həyatının və eyni zamanda oturaq əkinçi mədəniyyətinin ayrı aspektlərini aydınlaşdırmağa, öyrənməyə imkan verir və düşünürəm ki, gələn növbəti illərdə də bu materiallar hələ araşdırılacaqdır. Təşəkkür edirəm.
Sana çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Teveküll. And I would like to thank also Andrea Ricci for his paper. And then I would like to open the discussion among those